Okay, thank you all for being here. I'm going to read a short statement. I will take some questions, only those that do not interfere with the investigation and its outcome. Clear? At 8:27 p.m. on June 23rd, LPD dispatch received a 911 call in reference to a domestic disturbance involving weapons within the 3000 block of Valencia Avenue. Initial reports indicate that the suspect was intoxicated, armed with a bat, and damaging property within the residence. Fearing for their safety, the adult caller and 3 children were reportedly hiding from the suspect within a bathroom. At 8:28 p.m., LPD dispatch, while continuing to gather information from the caller, deployed 2 officers to the scene. At 8:34 p.m., the first officer arrived on scene and while approaching the dwelling witnessed the suspect, later identified as 38-year-old Jacob Alonzo, in the residence's driveway carrying a pickaxe. As the officer continued his approach, he called to Alonzo and ordered him to drop the weapon just as the subject approached an occupied vehicle in front of the house and struck it with the pickaxe. As the officer continued to direct the subject to drop the weapon, Alonzo turned his attention to the officer and aggressively moved towards him with the pickaxe, ignoring the officer's commands to drop the weapon. Having diverted the subject's attention away from the occupied vehicle, the officer attempted to back away from Alonzo as the subject aggressively progressed towards the officer, still holding the pickaxe in a state of readiness. At 8:35 p.m., after delivering repeated directives for the subject to drop the weapon, the officer was forced to engage Alonzo using his department-issued duty weapon. Even after being shot, Alonzo continued to aggressively charge the officer with the pickaxe raised above his head before throwing the weapon at the officer. At 8:36 p.m., the officer immediately requested the dispatch of EMS personnel to the scene. While awaiting the arrival of emergency medical personnel, the initial officer and second officer on scene employed life-saving measures. Upon the arrival of EMS personnel, and despite efforts extended by LPD personnel, Alonzo was pronounced dead. As is standard protocol, the Lubbock Metropolitan Special Crimes Unit, LPD Forensic Investigations Unit, and the LPD Office of Professional Standards responded to the scene. The officer who discharged their firearm is on administrative leave per department policy. The officer has been with LPD since February of 2023. Through the initial course of the investigation, it was discovered that Alonzo had made suicidal and homicidal threats prior to the officer's arrival. It's imperative that you understand that. During initial contact with the first arriving officer, Alonzo verbally and physically directed the officer to take action against him. The officer's repeated efforts towards de-escalating the situation were ignored by the suspect as he continued to progress on the officer with the weapon at ready. We want to remind the public in these situations that our officers are forced to make split-second decisions based off the actions and intentions of the individual, as well as the information that is available to them as they arrive on scene. We're aware of the public's perception when it comes to our department having 2 officer-involved shootings in such a short period of time. However, we want to remind the public that our officers do not get to pick and choose the circumstances surrounding the call they are dispatched to or the intentions and actions of those on scene when our officers arrive. Our department takes these use of force incidents seriously. This shooting, like all officer-involved shootings, will be thoroughly investigated. We also want to remind the public that the Lubbock Metropolitan Special Crimes Unit is an independent investigative body made up of investigators from both the Lubbock County Sheriff's Department and the Lubbock Police Department. This unit is housed in an off-site location to further increase investigative objectivity and separation. Do you have any questions?
Chief, on a daily basis, our officers face calls very similar to this, although they may not be as aggressive or violent. How well are our officers trained to deal with these domestic violence situations?
This is ongoing training that is initiated at the academy level and continues throughout the course of their careers. So it is imperative that we make sure that they are prepared through the training process, and it is ongoing.
You'd mentioned that there were 2 officers that were responding to this call. Was the other officer, involved in the shooting, or were they with potential victims?
There was a sufficient delay that the engagement of the suspect predated the arrival of the officers. So the first officer arrived on scene and immediately initiated contact, and unfortunately was forced to engage the suspect before the second officer could arrive.
Will you be releasing the body cam footage later?
That will be dependent on the Attorney General's office, sir.
Have you been called out to that address before?
I do not have any intel regarding the history on that location, no.
And does the suspect have prior arrest?
He does.
And as far as the reporting parties, were they related to Mr. Alonzo?
I would stipulate that this was a family violence disturbance.
As you had mentioned, this is the second officer-involved shooting that has occurred since you've taken office. What have been the results of the first encounter?
The first encounter was found that the officer was well within departmental policy as well as state and federal law.
And then officers returned to duty now?
Yes, sir, he has. Any other questions? All right.
Chief?
Thank you all.